And good morning, everyone, or afternoon or evening, wherever you may be. So let's begin with reciting prayers that will help us remember why we're here, what we're doing, get into a good state of mind for that. So I think, Venerable Dundrup, could you put the prayers up on the screen? While reciting the prayers, it's good if you can to imagine that the Buddha is in front of you. Just visualize the Buddha in the best way that you can, to the best of your ability. Even if you can't visualize very well, you can just imagine that the Buddha is there. And also, you're welcome to think of many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Lama Zopa Rinpoche has said that, all the time, wherever we are, there's many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas around us, looking at us with loving kindness and compassion and just ready to help us in whatever way they can. So it can help generate inspiration in our mind and feeling of safety and being protected and being helped and guided in our spiritual practice. And you're also welcome to imagine other beings around you taking refuge along with you and receiving the help and guidance of the Buddha. That also enhances our altruism, our sense of wanting to benefit all beings and wanting to learn the Dharma and practice the Dharma so that we can be more and more beneficial for other sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And then the 7 limb prayers to help us accumulate merit, positive energy, which is like nourishment, fertilizer for our positive qualities so that they can grow and become more and more strong and perfect. And also to purify any negative attitudes, negative states of mind, obscurations that prevent us from being able to progress along the path. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. The mandala offering is also a way of accumulating positive energy, positive potential. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niyatayami. And then let's recite the mantra of the Buddha 3 times. And while reciting it, imagine light flowing from the Buddha into you and into all living beings. And the light clears away negative energy, negative thoughts and emotions, karma, sickness, whatever kinds of physical, mental, emotional, negative energy we may have. Imagine that getting cleared away, purified, and our positive qualities and positive potential are nourished by this light flowing from the Buddha. Taya ta om muni muni maha munaye soha. Taya ta om muni muni maha munaye soha. Taya ta om muni muni Mahamunaye Soha. Okay, so I thought we could start with a bit of meditation on what we looked at last week, the 6 kinds of sufferings. So make sure you're sitting in a comfortable but conducive position, keeping your back straight, but still trying to be relaxed, not tight or tense. Allowing your breath to flow in a natural way. Just for a few moments, be aware of your breath flowing in and out. Let your mind settle down in the present, the here and now. Put aside any other thoughts you may have in your mind, like things you did earlier today or things you're going to do later. Just be in the present, right here, right now. And then bring into your mind the feeling of altruism, wanting to benefit other people and other beings as much as possible. And if you're comfortable with the idea of attaining enlightenment, you can add that as well, that that's your long-term goal, becoming fully enlightened, a Buddha, to help all living beings in the best possible way. I think that's your reason, your motivation for being here, participating in this session. So for the meditation, I'd like you to choose one of the 6 kinds of sufferings, general samsaric sufferings that we looked at last week. So I'll go through the list again to remind you and just see which one of these 6 stands out for you. And then focus on that and spend some time contemplating that. So the 6 are again, there's no certainty in samsara. And the second is there's no satisfaction in samsara. And third is having to die again and again. The fourth is having to be reborn again and again. And the fifth is going up and down again and again, sometimes in a high position, high situation, and then losing that, falling down into a low one. And then the 6th one is being alone at certain crucial moments in our existence, like when we're born, when we die. So pick one of those 6 and then contemplate it for about 5 minutes. Bring examples from your own experience in to illustrate that type of suffering, make it real, make it alive for you. You can also think of examples from other people's experience, people you know, people you've heard about in the news and so on. Just try to really get a sense of that particular type of suffering and how it occurs again and again, as long as we are in samsara, cyclic existence. Okay, so as a conclusion to the meditation, hopefully you can see that this kind of problem is something we don't want to experience, but we have no choice. We do experience it, and not just once, but again and again. Keeps coming back again and again, as long as we are in samsara, cyclic existence. So that's not nice to think about, but it is possible for us to be free from this kind of problem and all other problems and all the painful situations in samsara, including the very causes of samsara. It is possible to be free from all of this, to leave all of this behind and never have to experience it again. So does that sound like something you would like to achieve? So I don't know about you, but I think many people find it quite challenging to have to meditate on suffering. I think in the West, we tend to have the idea that meditation should be about beautiful things, light and love and joy and rainbows and only pleasant things. And, we only think about pleasant things and we only have pleasant experiences. But that's not the case in Buddhism. In Buddhism, the whole purpose of practicing meditation is to free ourselves from suffering, all the painful, unpleasant experiences of cyclic existence, samsara, and the very causes of suffering, to free ourselves, and then on top of that, work to help others to be free as well. And so to be able to do that, we have to be willing to face up to the reality of suffering. We can't just try to ignore it and deny it and pretend that it's not there and only think about things that are pleasant and beautiful. So suffering does exist, and it's not going to go away just by our ignoring it. So we do have to face up to it. And even though it's not pleasant, it's not comfortable, I've heard from a number of people that they actually feel a sense of relief. I'm just going to try to get rid of this fuzziness here. That's better. They feel a sense of relief when they encounter the Buddhist teachings on suffering, because it's something they were always aware of, but it's often difficult to find anybody willing to talk about it or hear about it or think about it. There's this tendency to want to just avoid it and deny it and pretend everything is wonderful in life, and it's probably even more true nowadays with things like Facebook, which I don't use Facebook, but I've heard about how people tend to portray themselves on Facebook as if everything is wonderful in their life. They hide any kind of problems or imperfections or painful experiences. So it's an illusion. It's just not true. Everybody has problems, even if they're hiding them. And so Buddhism says it's much better to face up to the reality of problems, because then we will start working on overcoming them and doing the things we need to do to be free of suffering and so on. But on the other hand, the purpose of meditating on suffering is not to become depressed, to become overwhelmed, to feel a sense of hopelessness and despair. And so if that's happening to you, you need to be careful. And in fact, I read something in one of the books of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, where he said, if you're the kind of person who tends to get depressed, maybe you shouldn't meditate too much on suffering. And I was so relieved to read that, because I think that, that's the case with me. And so, yeah, the purpose of meditating on suffering isn't to have more suffering, isn't to be depressed and feel helpless and hopeless. It's to inspire ourselves, to generate enthusiasm, energy, to get ourselves out of suffering, to do the things we need to do in order to be free of suffering, and then help others be free of suffering. But if that's not happening, and instead if you're just getting more and more and more depressed and hopeless, that's definitely not working. Okay, that's not the point. And so if you notice that happening, if you notice you're getting depressed, then you need to, turn your attention away from suffering to something that's more uplifting and more, they'll give you a sense of hope. For example, Buddha nature, the fact that you have the potential to be free of suffering and to be enlightened. And everybody, every sentient being has this potential as well. It's the true nature of our being, true nature of our mind. So spend some time contemplating that to uplift your mind and get yourself out of depression and hopelessness. And anything else, taking refuge in your spiritual teachers and the Buddha, remembering they are there to help us, to guide us, and generating compassion, loving kindness. So turn your attention to something that's positive and uplifting, that will help you get out of a state of depression. So you need to watch your mind and make sure your mind is in a balanced state and doesn't sink into depression. So there were a couple of questions from last week's class, so I'll start by answering those. The first question is, regarding the benefits of relying on a spiritual teacher, point 3 says, you will not be harmed by beings with ill intent. If you are being harmed by beings with ill intent, does that mean that your reliance is flawed? That's a good question. So I don't think that point means we should think, well, as soon as we have a spiritual teacher and we're, relying on a spiritual teacher, that everything should go well and we should never have any unpleasant experiences with anybody. Nobody's ever going to be mean to us. And that if someone is mean to us, if someone is harming us, that means there's something wrong with our practice. Because I was thinking about what happened in Tibet when Tibet was taken over by the Chinese. And all these Tibetan people, including many, many monks and nuns, were put into prison where they were kept for many years, and they were beaten and tortured and starved and, had horrible, horrible, horrible experiences. And I don't think it would make sense to say that that all of those people weren't practicing spirit, relying on the spiritual teacher properly, and that's why they had those bad experiences. So, yeah, there's lots of cases, lots of stories of people who are practicing very, very well, very diligently, and having very good devotion to their spiritual teachers, and yet they still encounter difficult experiences and being harmed by others. So I think the right way of thinking about this is that if we are harmed by others, this is the result of our karma from the past, having done negative actions in past lives. And sometimes that karma is just so strong that even if we have very pure devotion and we're practicing really well, the path in relation to our spiritual teacher, that karma is still very strong. Like For example, there's this the story of Angulimala. He was actually a mass murderer at the time of the Buddha. He killed like 999 people, probably a record. And then he met the Buddha and became the disciple of the Buddha, and abandoned killing and was practicing very, very, very hard. And in that very same lifetime, attained nirvana. He actually became an arhat. He attained a state of liberation. But one time when he was going on alms round, which is what the monks would do, they'd go into town and collect food for their lunch. Some people saw him and they recognized that he was this mass murderer, and they, a whole gang of them beat him up. And so he got really badly beaten and didn't die. But, when he met the Buddha again, the Buddha spoke to him about his karma, that this is your karma, which is quite understandable. In that very same lifetime, he created a huge amount of bad karma. So he still had that karma to have to go through in getting beaten up. So it's not because there was a flaw in his devotion to the Buddha, but because his karma was just very, very strong. And so I think the reason, or the way to think about this point, that if we rely on a spiritual teacher, then that's like protection from harm from other people and other beings, is that when we meet a teacher and we start practicing what a teacher is teaching us, we learn how to purify karma. Okay, we learn about karma, and then we try our best to avoid creating bad karma and create good karma as much as we can. And we also learn how to purify our karma so that we're purifying this bad karma from the past. And so by purifying our bad karma, there's less chance that we would encounter bad experiences like being harmed by others. But this is a gradual process. It isn't something that happens all at once. It's not as soon as we take up a relationship with a teacher and practice devotion to a teacher, all our bad karma is going to go away and we're never going to have any more problems. That's just not realistic. But it does decrease. Our bad karma will decrease, and our virtue will increase. And by having more virtue, good karma, then we're more likely to meet with good experiences, and people being nice to us and so on. But again, that's a gradual process. So most likely we will still have some difficulties with people, and maybe even meet with people who try to harm us. But having learned Dharma from our teacher, even if we do find ourselves in those circumstances, we've learned how to deal with them. We've learned patience, the practice of patience, the practice of karma, and so that will help us to avoid reacting with anger and then retaliating, which is what normally happens. If somebody harms me, then I want to harm them back. But because we've learned the Dharma, we're less likely to do that. And instead we'll think, oh no, if I get angry and harm this person back, I'll just create more bad karma. And that's not what I want to do. So we'll be able to stop ourselves from doing that, and even practice patience, and even be able to feel some compassion for this person. And so in that way, even if that person harms us mentally, psychologically, it's actually a good thing. Our mind is not being harmed. Even if our body is being harmed, our mind is able to stay positive and use this situation to create virtue rather than just more non-virtue, more negative karma. So I think that's the way of thinking about this, this particular point. It's a process. Slowly, there'll be less harm to us from other people, and we'll have better experiences. And even when harm does come, we'll have tools we can use to make that situation into something beneficial rather than harmful. I hope that makes sense. And then the second question, is there an illustration or photo of the refuge field described in the Easy Paths Preliminary Practices section? Is it similar to the Lama Zopa merit field? Okay, so I found a photo. Venerable Losang, if you could put the slides up. So in the 6 preliminaries, okay, the next one. So in the 6 preliminary practices in the book, The Easy Path, there's actually 2 visualizations. The first one is when we take refuge, and yeah, it's sometimes called the refuge field. I think this is what this person is referring to, the refuge field. So that's the first visualization that we do, and it describes Shakyamuni Buddha in the center, and then surrounding him the different gurus, your root gurus in front of the Buddha, and then the lineage gurus around him, and so on. So this picture I found on the FPMT shop, and it was a free download. So I downloaded it and sent it to Venerable Dundrup, and he put it in the materials page for this course on the Thubten Norbuling website. So anyone who wants it can get it there. It didn't all fit in the slides. So this is a somewhat, shortened version of it, but you can have the full version of it. Yeah. And so, the way it's described is that all of these figures are on top of a very big throne. And for me, when I do the visualization, I think of like a stage, like a Broadway stage, because when you think of a throne, it's usually kind of small. But I think of a Broadway stage, where you can sometimes have hundreds or maybe even thousands of people on top of the stage. So I think of something really huge like that. And then all of the figures are actually on top of that in this different arrangement. So I think this is the visualization for the refuge objects. And then when you're doing the 6 preparatory practices or 6 preliminary practices, after you take, so you do this visualization while you take refuge, generate bodhicitta, and meditate on the 4 measurable thoughts. And then you dissolve this visualization, and then you visualize what's called the merit field. This is in the book on page 43. And the merit field, there's different versions of the merit field. And in the book, it says you can use the Lama Zopa merit field if you wish. I don't have a picture of that here, but you can find pictures of that, the Lama Zopa merit field. But the book also describes it, the original first Panchen Lama's explanation describes another visualization. But to be honest, it seems just like this one. I couldn't see any difference because it still has Shakyamuni Buddha as the central figure, surrounded by the root and lineage gurus, the deities of Tantra, and so on and so forth. So I didn't really see any difference. But anyway, the point is there are different options. You get to choose. So you don't have to stick to just one visualization. You can use the one in the book, which is this one, or you can use the Lama Zopa merit field. And also on page 46 in the book, he says, if you can't visualize all the figures of the merit field clearly, then it is sufficient simply to imagine that they are there and to cultivate faith. So that's helpful, because I know a lot of people do have difficulty visualizing, and even visualizing one figure, like the Buddha, is very difficult. So to visualize a whole group of figures is very difficult. So if you have difficulty visualizing, don't worry. Just feel that they're there. And also, he says another option for the merit field is called the condensed jewel method. And this is to visualize just one single figure. So you don't have to visualize a huge mass, just one figure. And he says this actually is explained later in the Easy Path text. So you visualize your guru, your spiritual teacher, in the form of Shakyamuni Buddha above your head. I think you could also visualize in front of you if you find it difficult to imagine above your head. But that's good to know as well, that you know, if you're more comfortable with a simple visualization rather than a complicated one, then you're welcome to do that. So, you know, some people like very complex visualizations. They can really get into that and benefit from that. But for others, that's not easy and not comfortable. So it's good to know that you can have a more simple visualization if you prefer. So I hope that clarifies that question. Then, okay, so to continue, the next slide. So we are now in the middle scope of the Lam Rim, and the main point here in this part of the Lam Rim is to generate what's called renunciation. And another term for renunciation, because the word renunciation for some people can sound like, you know, you have to give up all your fun, your pleasure, you can't have any enjoyments, you have to live a very strict ascetic life and sleep on the floor and just eat brown rice all the time. And yeah, so many people might feel, ooh, I don't want that. But another term for renunciation is the determination to be free, the determination to be free. And that's actually closer to the Tibetan term, which is ngejung, and that literally means definite emergence. So the idea of emerging from, getting out of, freeing ourselves from samsara, cyclic existence. So that might sound more positive, more like something you'd like to do. Yeah, I want to get free. And so it's focusing more on freedom rather than giving up things that maybe we're not ready to give up. So yeah, you're welcome to use whichever term you prefer. So in the small scope, which we were looking at during the first part of this course, in the small scope of the Lam Rim, we look at the sufferings of the lower rebirths, the three lower realms, animal, hungry ghost, and hell. That was one of the meditations in that section of the Lam Rim. And so, you know, it's easy to see that those places, those realms are terrible, and places we want to avoid. We don't want to be born there. So it's kind of easy to feel the wish to avoid those and to avoid the causes for them, which is negative karma, like the 10 non-virtuous actions, and create virtue. So that's included in the lower scope. So yeah, so if we really understand the lower scope or the small scope, then we feel concerned about our future life, where we're going to be born after this life. And we want to make sure we don't be born, we don't take birth in a lower state of existence, and instead are born in a good state, like as a human being or as a deva, a god. And we live our life according to karma in order to bring that about. And that's a good thing. It is good to create the causes for fortunate rebirths in our next life. Because even if our long-term goal is enlightenment, becoming a Buddha or nirvana, getting out of samsara, realistically, that's not something that's going to happen in this lifetime. So we have to make sure that in our next life, and however many other lives we have to go before we attain nirvana or enlightenment, we are always in good rebirths, good situations, fortunate rebirths, where we can continue to practice the Dharma, continue to work for our long-term goal. But with the middle scope, we look at how even if we're born in good situations, like as a human or a deva, there's still problems. We're not free of suffering. So I was thinking of an analogy. If you get lost in a forest, okay, and you're wandering around in this forest trying to find your way out and trying to find your way home. So that's one situation, one bad situation, one problem. And then you encounter a bear, yeah, big bear, and you're all alone and you probably feel really scared. So what they say that what you should do if you meet a bear is don't run away, but make yourself look really big and scary. Okay, so you have to kind of puff yourself up and look big and scream and yell, and the bear will run away, hopefully. Okay, so if that happens, if you manage to get the bear to run away, you probably feel a big sense of relief. That problem is out of the way. But you still have the problem of being lost in the forest. Okay, so you're still not out of danger. You still have to find your way out of this forest and find your way home. So it's a little bit like that with, if we manage to avoid a bad rebirth in our next life, in our future life, and get a good rebirth, that's good. That's one problem out of the way. However, we're still not out of danger. As long as we're in samsara, we're lost. We're like lost in the forest. It's not a good situation to be in. So we got to get ourselves out. Okay, so this is the main point in the middle scope, is to recognize that samsara is not a good situation. It's sometimes described as or compared to a prison, like being in a prison. So it's something we have to recognize as undesirable and generate this sense of renunciation or the determination to be free. And the way to do this is by meditating on the sufferings of samsara. So that's the reason. It's really helpful to understand why we meditate on suffering. What's the point of it? It's not pleasant. It can make us feel depressed and despair, but it's important. In fact, it's essential if we want to get out of samsara. And also if we want to become enlightened, we also have to recognize that samsara is a terrible situation. And we want to help all other sentient beings be free of samsara. So it's really important to be aware of the sufferings of samsara. So this time we're going to go on to, last time we looked at 6 types of suffering, which are general sufferings of samsara. And this time we're going to look at the sufferings of the upper realms. So we have to recognize that they too have problems, and so that we don't have attachment. We don't have attachment to rebirth in the upper realms. So the next slide is looking at human sufferings. And usually the list of human sufferings is 8 kinds of suffering, but the book, Easy Path, mentions 10. And it's not like contradictory, it's just somewhat different. So I'm just going to focus on the usual list of 8, and that down at the bottom I put the additional 2 mentioned by the Easy Path. So these are actually mentioned by the Buddha in his very first teaching. right out, after he became enlightened, and then he gave his first teaching in Sarnath near Varanasi in India. The teaching called the Dhammachakra Sutra, the Wheel of Dharma Sutra. So in that sutra, he explained the Four Noble Truths, and he mentioned these 8 kinds of sufferings. Okay, so let's go through them and think about them. So the first one is birth. So this is often hard for Western people because we tend to have romantic ideas about birth and imagine the baby in the womb is very comfortable. It's kind of nice and cozy and safe. Buddhism explains it quite differently, that it's not a nice situation being in the womb and coming out of the womb. So for me, what I think about that helps me see birth as unpleasant is just to imagine if I had to go into a dark, enclosed space, dark and hot. I mean, the temperature of the body, our body temperature is 98.6. So imagine being in that kind of temperature constantly 24 hours a day. And it's dark and you're all alone and you've got nothing to do. Okay, you can't read books or watch TV or go on the internet, talk to people. Yeah, so thinking about it in that way, being completely alone in the dark, in the hot, enclosed space, all, for 24/7, every minute, every second, 24/7 for 9 months or 10 months. Is that really something you'd like to do? And so some people say, well, the baby doesn't really understand what's going on. Their mind isn't so developed. Maybe, I don't know. I can't remember what that experience is like. But when I think about it, it's, not really something I look forward to. And then the process of being born, we know the mother experiences a lot of pain. Buddhism says the baby does as well, coming through that very narrow birth canal and then coming out into this, bright light and cold air and people touching you and so on. That can be painful, traumatic. Yeah, so something to think about. And then after being born, you're born, you have a new life, and it's not always easy. There's problems. Babies cry, don't they? So when a baby is crying, you think it's feeling happy, comfortable, pleasant? So something to think about, something to contemplate, check out. Then aging. According to Buddhism, aging starts right after we're born. We start to age because we have this expression, growing pains, which can refer to even losing your baby teeth and getting adult teeth. And that's painful. And then leaving home and having to go to school for many children, that's really painful, separating from mom. And then later, the physical and emotional challenges of puberty when we're teenagers. So as we grow and get older and go through life, there's different kinds of challenges and experiences we have to go through. And then later in life, when we're especially in our 50s and 60s and 70s and so on, there's even more difficulties as our body is breaking down and more sickness. Of course, losing the things we had as a child, as a youth, nice skin, nice hair, good eyesight, good hearing, good memory. So all these decline as we get older, and other kinds of problems like finding ourselves sidelined by people. There's so much emphasis on youth and beauty. So when you're older, not so beautiful, not so sharp in your thinking, you may feel kind of left out. So these are some of the problems with aging. And then number 3, sickness. So we all know that there can be physical pain, physical discomfort, having to take medicine or go through medical treatments, which can be very unpleasant. And emotional as well, maybe feeling depressed because we can't do the things we normally like to do. And again, feeling like we're missing out. We're left out of what other people are doing because we're sick. And fear, anxiety, depression. How long is this sickness going to go on? Will I ever get better? Maybe it will last the rest of my life. So there's different kinds of problems with sickness, both physical and emotional. And then death. So at some point in life, even if we don't have much sickness, maybe we're very healthy most of our life, no major physical problems, but all of us eventually will have to face dying. And that's something nobody looks forward to. Buddhism says it's very important to contemplate death because it's going to happen to us, and it's important to be prepared for it. And the awareness of death can actually help us live our life well. Really make sure that we live our life doing good, being positive as much as we can, developing our spiritual practice. And in that way, even when death comes, we won't find it so difficult. We won't be so frightened and so on. So how we die, what experience we have as we die depends very much on how we live our life. So it doesn't have to be a painful, difficult experience, depending on how we live and mainly what we do with our mind, how we develop our mind, how we train our mind. But still, it's difficult, especially leaving behind people and our possessions, our home, our body. So that's difficult. And that's actually the next one. The next suffering, number 5, is separating from what we like. We don't like to separate from people and things that we like. And of course, that happens when we die, but it can also happen while we're alive. Sometimes we have separation. Sometimes it's just a temporary separation, like somebody goes overseas or goes far away to work or to study, and they're just not there nearby as much as we want. So that's very painful for a lot of people. And also separating from our things. Sometimes they're stolen, or they're lost, or they just fall apart, break down. So we don't like losing and having to separate from the things that we like. But this is something that happens as we go through life. And then number 6 is encountering what we don't like. So that's the opposite. So there's lots of things we don't want to have to meet with, like certain types of people who we find really annoying or difficult or aren't nice to us, and different weather conditions. Like right now we're going through a hot heat wave, really, really hot weather, which isn't very pleasant. Other times it's extremely cold. And then there's natural disasters that happen, floods and hurricanes and earthquakes and forest fires, bushfires, and so on. So there's all kinds of unpleasant things that we don't want to have to meet with. And yet they do happen. We don't have any choice or control over it. So even on a daily basis, this kind of thing can happen. And then number 7 is not getting what we want. So this reminds me of the old Rolling Stones song, "You can't always get what you want." It's very true. And so even, there's things we want. We have plans and dreams, hopes, and we may try very, very hard to make sure that things will work out the way we want and we get what we want, but we don't have complete control over that. There's so many different causes and conditions to be able to get things. And those causes and conditions may not come together. And so we won't get what we want. And this can include things like a relationship. We may find a person very attractive and charming, and we really want to get close to them and have a friendship with them or a relationship with them, but they may not feel the same way about us. And certain jobs that we want, certain places we'd like to live, being successful in the things that we do, being wealthy, and so on and so forth. So we're not always able to get these things. Then the eighth one is just having contaminated aggregates. So the aggregates refer to our body and mind, this body-mind situation. And contaminated doesn't mean like radioactive. It means contaminated by ignorance, mainly ignorance and karma and other afflictions. So according to Buddhism, our very existence, coming into this life, coming into this world, is the result of ignorance and karma. We'll get into that more later. We'll look at the 12 links, which is the Buddhist explanation of what are the causes and conditions for taking rebirth in samsara. But it's mainly karma and afflictions, especially ignorance. So it's not that we were created by some perfect divine being with wisdom and compassion and love. That's not the origin of our life. Instead, the causes and conditions giving rise to this very life, to this body-mind situation, are things that are contaminated by ignorance and karma and other afflictions. And so because the causes are contaminated, then the result is contaminated. Our body and mind are contaminated with afflictions and karma and ignorance. And just because of that, it's like we're a magnet for problems. We're a magnet for suffering. We have to go through all these different kinds of sufferings again and again and again. Sickness, aging, death, not getting what we want, and so on. So that's not easy to understand. That takes time to understand, but we'll look at it more later. But yeah, so our very situation in samsara is very imperfect, full of faults, and it's only natural that we then experience sufferings. So those are the usual 8, and then the easy path adds 2 more: hunger and thirst. That's actually the first one that's mentioned. We all experience that sometimes, especially if you get lost in the forest or lost in the desert. Yeah, so some people experience it a lot. There's people in the world who, because of poverty or famine, they may only eat 1 meal a day, sometimes even go several days without a proper meal. And thirst as well. Some places, good, clean, drinkable water is very hard to come by. So they may not have as much to drink as they would like. And then the 10th is constant seeking. So this means always trying to fulfill our desires for things like partners, friends, education, jobs, wealth, and so on. So we have so many desires, so many wishes, and we're always having to work on trying to get these things fulfilled. So those are the 8 human sufferings, but they're not exclusive to the human realm. I mean, many beings in other realms experience these as well. For example, animals, they also have these kind of problems. But they're particularly mentioned for humans because we're human beings. This is the kind of life we have. So we can relate to these kind of sufferings. We ourselves experience them, and we can see them in the world around us. So the point of thinking about this is, even though we say that being born as a human being is the best situation for learning the Dharma and practicing the Dharma, but we have to understand that it's not a goal in itself. That, we shouldn't have the idea, oh, I want to be born as a human being because it's such a wonderful life and I'll just have nothing but wonderful experiences and I won't have any problems. So we shouldn't have that kind of illusion and attachment to life as a human being. Instead, we should see human life as the best situation to continue our practice of Dharma, to reach more long-term goals like liberation and enlightenment. But it's not an end in itself. It still has problems. So that will help us to not be attached to life as a human being. So the next slide is, this is another realm. Sometimes it's called demigods, or asuras is another term. I've also come across the term titans. And so these are talked about in Buddhism, but also in Hinduism. Hinduism also acknowledges the existence of these beings. And there's not a whole lot of information about them, but they're said to reside, their realm is close to the God realms, but somewhat below. So I showed this is a picture from a Wheel of Life, and the God realms are on the right side, on the top of what this pillar, it's actually Mount Meru. So they're kind of on top of that and above that. And then the demigods are down below. You can't see it very well, but they're kind of, lined up like an army trying to attack the gods. So this is what usually happens with the demigods. They have jealousy. They can see the gods and the enjoyments the gods have, and they're jealous because they realize their enjoyments aren't as good. So they want to fight against the gods and try to steal their nice enjoyments. So their sufferings are jealousy. They suffer from jealousy, which is, we all know, it's a very painful state of mind. And they also have hostility. They're actually willing to go to war to get what they want. And then attachment, having this strong attachment for what the gods have and they don't have. So these are mental sufferings. But then when they do go to war, of course, that's not a pleasant experience. And they usually lose because their karma isn't so good. So they usually lose the wars. And that's not a nice thing, to be the loser. And, some of them get injured, they get killed, and they also lose friends. So their friends may get killed in the war. And also possessions. It's said that the gods will sometimes come to their realm and steal their things. And so it's not a good situation. And in fact, in some Buddhist schools, like in the Theravada tradition, I think, these are considered a lower rebirth, an unfortunate rebirth, not an upper one. So there's different opinions about that. But anyway, there's definitely suffering if we're born in this realm. So it's not something to aspire to. Now the next slide, the gods or the devas. So this is the highest place to be born in samsara, and it's actually complex. There's many different god realms. And some are what are called desire realm gods. I'll can't remember whether or not I pointed this out, the different realms, but the desire realm, this is one type of god. And there's 6 different god realms in the desire realm. And so they have sufferings too. They still have to, the demigods, the asuras are fighting against them. So they have to deal with war, fighting with the demigods. And it's said that even though they have a very long life, and most of the time it's very pleasant, but before they die, a week before they die, they start having different signs that they're about to die. And these include things like the radiance. They normally have very radiant bodies, but this radiance starts to fade. And their clothes are normally very beautiful and clean. They don't even have to wash them. They just naturally clean. But they start looking dirty and shabby and smelly. And so they know by these signs that are happening, they know that their life is coming to an end. And also the other gods will notice what's happening, and then they'll stay away from these people. You know, they don't want to be around them, these gods. And so they suffer a lot from mental suffering. You know, this long, wonderful life that they've had is now coming to an end, and they're really unhappy. And also they have premonition about their next rebirth, where they're going to be born next. And it's sometimes in one of the lower realms. But even if it's in a human realm, you know, comparatively, being born as a human being is horrible compared to their world. So these are the sufferings that they have. So even in the God realms, it's not perfect. It's not ideal. It's not free of suffering. Another type of God are form realm and formless realm gods. Those come about as a result of developing samadhi, single-pointed concentration. And these are the best place to be born in samsara, because they're very, very peaceful and blissful, and they have no gross suffering. In fact, in the formless realm, you don't even have a physical body. It's just a mind, a state of mind, and a state of meditative concentration the whole life. Very, very blissful. But they're not completely free of suffering, because they're still in samsara. They're still subject to death and rebirth. They still have to die. And after they die, they're often born in a lower realm, because they still have karma they created in previous lives. That doesn't get purified. So their blissful life comes to an end, and another karma ripens, and then they could find themselves in a lower realm, or even in a human realm. Again, comparatively, that's horrible rebirth compared to where they were. So the point is, wherever we're born in samsara, even in the highest places, we're not out of the forest. We're not out of danger. We still have karma. We still have afflictions. We still have ignorance. So we just keep circling over and over and over again in samsara, sometimes in high realms, sometimes in lower realms, and so on and so forth. So it's just a miserable situation. So we'll just quickly look at one more slide, and then we'll end for today. So this is another list of suffering, 3 kinds of suffering, and these summarize all the other sufferings in samsara. I'll talk more about it next time, because it's a really important topic. But the first type of suffering is called the suffering of suffering, and that simply refers to whatever physical and mental experiences we have that are obviously painful. Nobody has to tell us this is suffering. We know. Okay, so that can include physical pain and sickness, but also mental pain. Mental pain, like when we lose a loved one, or we're frightened, anxious, depressed. The second type of suffering is not easy to recognize. It's called the suffering of change. And this refers to pleasant experiences that don't last, but they vanish. And so they are unsatisfying. So one example is eating. We all like to eat. And so while we're eating, and maybe for a little while afterwards, we feel some pleasure. Our hunger is gone. We feel satisfied. But that doesn't last very long. Maybe, a little while later, we're hungry again. We have to eat again. So samsaric pleasures are like that. They don't last, and they don't completely take away our suffering and our sense of dissatisfaction. They're just like very short-term pleasures that quickly disappear, like a rainbow, like a dream. They don't last. So it's considered another kind of suffering. Now, the word suffering here probably doesn't work. And the word in Sanskrit and Pali is dukkha. And dukkha has more a sense of unsatisfactoriness. So that's how it is in samsara. Whatever experience we have, it's not completely satisfying. There's no genuine long-term happiness and satisfaction. It's all unsatisfying. And the third one, just quickly, is pervasive compounded suffering. And this is, yeah, we'll talk more about it later, but just the fact that we have this body-mind situation, these aggregates of body and mind that came about due to karma and afflictions, especially ignorance. That's what I was talking about before with the human suffering, the 8th human suffering. Just having a body and mind that arose from factors that are imperfect, karma and afflictions. And so we're living, it's like we are like a magnet for suffering, magnet for problems. As long as we have this kind of situation, there's no genuine peace, happiness, satisfaction. So yeah, we ran out of time. So I'll talk more about these. These are really important, but the next slide just gives you some homework for before next time. So reading the easy path, those 2 sections about the 3 kinds of sufferings and the 4 noble truths, which is starting to look at the causes of suffering, which are really important. And then before the next class, try to do some reflection, some meditation on either the 8 types of sufferings or the 3 types of sufferings, just as much as you can manage. And then in your daily life, look out for examples of these types of sufferings to illustrate them, to make them more real, get more confidence in them. Okay, so we'll stop there. And if you do have any questions, you can send them in and I'll do my best to answer them next time. So let's finish with the prayers. So feel confident that we have created merit, positive energy during this time, coming together with the positive motivation, looking at the Dharma, learning about it, thinking about it. This is definitely a good thing to do. We create merit. So now we share this merit with all other beings to bring about their peace and happiness and eventually enlightenment. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And dedicate also for the long lives of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, incomparably kind and supreme Tenzin Gyatso, the wish-fulfilling, wish-granting jewel, source of every benefit and happiness in this world. May you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers, honoring the 3 sublime ones. Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Okay, so thank you very much for joining. And be well, safe, happy. But remember there's suffering, but not to be depressed by it. And see you next week.